And I have a poll to start us out with quickly. So if you can take a moment, complete the poll. And keep in mind that if there is something that you're looking for, certainly reach out to your campus offices throughout the rest of this week. There are still additional sessions for our combined UC fair this week. So a lot more presentations to come today, tomorrow, and Friday. I'll give it a few more seconds for those who are still trying to take the poll. So a lot of you looking for ways to pay for your experience abroad. So my hope is that this session will help you with that. And I'm going to turn this over to Jeff Carey to talk about the Boren Awards.
Thanks. And you can see my slides up on the screen.
Yes.
I noted that not only did a lot of you say that you wanted to pay for your experience abroad, but also the second most commonly selected was connected with my professional goals. And so I'm glad that you are here for this presentation because we're going to cover something that is at the nexus of international study, language study, and professional development, particularly for people who have an interest in careers with the federal government. My name is Jeff Carey. I work for the Institute of International Education, and we administer this program on behalf of the Department of Defense, but it is for the entirety of the federal government. So as we go through this presentation, we'll talk both about the structure of the overseas study and then also the career opportunities that will present themselves after. As I go through this presentation, I just want to call everyone's attention to the lower left-hand corner of the screen. There you will see a URL where you can find more information on any of the topics that I cover on these slides. So don't feel like you need to scribble down notes furiously while I'm talking. The basic eligibility requirements for the Boren Awards are fairly straightforward. You do need to be a U.S. citizen at the time of application, but we have a lot of people who apply for and receive this award who are naturalized citizens of the U.S. So if that describes you, please feel encouraged to apply as well. As long as your naturalization certificate is dated before our application deadline, you are eligible to apply that year. You do need to be planning to study a foreign language as part of your overseas studies. So whatever else you plan to do, please make sure that foreign language study is a component. Also, we are emphasizing study in regions of the world that are less commonly studied by Americans. So this scholarship is not focused on Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, or or Canada. What it is focused on are the other parts of the world: Asia, Africa, the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and Latin America. You do need to be a matriculated undergraduate or graduate student during your time on this program, so please confirm that you are when you are applying. You can speak with the Boren Awards campus representatives at each of your individual campuses, and there should be one, I believe, at all of the UC schools. And they can tell you more about how to maintain your matriculation while you're abroad. But as long as you believe you'll be a matriculated undergraduate or graduate student next year, you can apply. You also may not be a citizen of the country in which you propose to study. So if you hold dual citizenship, just apply somewhere else. For most languages, there's more than one option where you can study the language intensively, but we do not allow people to go to countries where they hold citizenship. Okay, the next three slides focus on the main selection criteria for the Boren Awards. So I like to spend a good amount of time on each of these to make sure that everyone understands what it is that we're looking for. The first thing that we ask you to do on this application is to explain your interest in this particular country, region, language in terms of US national security. Now, we use the term national security because this is part of something called the National Security Education Program, but we define it very broadly. It's basically any type of public policy issue that has some effect on US national security or foreign affairs. So certainly there are people that have a focus on specifically internet security, defense, intelligence matters. And if that's your focus, please talk about it in the application. But we also have a lot of people who frame their interest in terms of diplomatic relations, and so many people who are interested in topics related to international development. So things like global public health, food security and agriculture, education, etc. If you're someone with a business or econ background, you can also frame those topics in terms of the related US public policies. Or if you're a STEM major, there are ways to explain the international relevance and the public policy relevance of your chosen field. What we do not want you to do on this application is talk about your interest in this country in too general of terms. This is not an opportunity to rewrite the Wikipedia entry on this country. Rather, we would like you to focus in on something you have an actual academic interest in and then explain its relevance to US national security. The reason we're so focused on this topic of national security is because everyone who receives a Boren scholarship or fellowship commits to working for the federal government for at least a year. But ideally, we're looking for people with a longer term, more passionate interest in these careers. And we will provide you with a lot of support in getting them, which I'll talk about later. But it's important that you do some research about the short, medium, and long-term steps that you can take to pursue your career and to find ways to apply your academic skills and interests. And then finally, it wouldn't be the Boren Awards if it weren't for the focus on language and culture. So we are really looking for passionate language students, whether or not that is your major. You can come from any background, but what brings all of our Boren scholars and fellows together is a passion for language study. The most important words on this slide are during and after Boren, because for most of our languages, there is no minimum proficiency requirement. That said, there's also no maximum proficiency requirement for most of our languages. So if you have studied a language, even if you consider yourself to be quite proficient in that language, I would encourage you to continue your investment, because what Boren's looking to do is develop deeper language skills. The key, though, is not what level you come in with. It's whether you pick a program that is appropriate to your existing level in the language. So if you're a beginner or an intermediate student, you want to spend most of your time in the classroom getting the basics of the language under your belt. But if you are an advanced student, you should look at ways to develop your professional vocabulary, to work on your academic writing, to work on your public speaking. The key is to find a program that is appropriate to your level. Okay, so for undergraduate and graduate applicants to the Boren Awards, it is possible to fund basically two types of eligible programs. The first of these are called the flagship language initiatives, and these are for the study of a particular subset of our preferred languages in Africa, South Asia, Indonesia, and the region where Turkey is located. So for each of these programs, there is a summer domestic intensive study at a US university, followed by a fall overseas intensive program. You do have the option to continue on into the spring in a self-identified program, but you do, for the summer and fall, need to follow the structure of Boren. But these are excellent credit-bearing programs that are appropriate for both undergrads and grad students, and in nearly every case, they accept people at the beginner level. So by the time you're done with this program, summer and fall, you're going to be lower intermediate, maybe even an advanced speaker of the language in less than a year. So that's a really exciting opportunity. But for most of our most popular languages, languages like Mandarin, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Arabic, Russian, Portuguese, we are looking for undergraduate and graduate students to either identify their own program or, in the case of graduate students, design one. So I'll go first through the flagship language initiatives, and then we'll talk a bit about self-designed program structure. The African Flagship Languages Initiative, or AFLI, is for the study of 5 different languages in Africa. We accept beginners into all of these languages except for French. French does require at least intermediate proficiency, but if you are a student of French, I think you'll find that this is an exciting opportunity to continue deepening your proficiency in a very important cultural, political, economic center of Francophone Africa. Um, we also have Swahili, where our overseas program is in Tanzania. And then for the other 3 languages, we have sort of inconsistent demand. And so we do have a summer program available to you that will prepare you for your overseas study, but then you will need to identify your own program for the fall. For all 5 of these languages, you have the opportunity to continue into the spring if you would like. It does need to be in the same country, and it does need to continue to be a language intensive program. We also have something called the Indonesian Flagship Languages Initiative. This is specifically for the study of Bahasa Indonesia, the main official language of Indonesia. Indonesia is obviously a very important country. It's the 4th most populous country on earth. It occupies a very important geographic region of the world. And there are a lot of different elements of US public policy that are interested in that country. So this language is one that if you've never studied an Asian language before you may make quicker progress with, because it's written in a Latin script and it isn't tonal. So you may find that you make quicker progress. By the time you're done with that summer program at the University of Wisconsin, which will also issue your transcript for Indonesian study, you go overseas to Indonesia for the fall and can continue into the spring if you choose. We also have a program called SAFLI for the study of either Hindi or Urdu. Again, the summer domestic is at the University of Wisconsin. Fall overseas programs are in India, and then you have the option to continue into the spring if you choose. Again, we accept beginners into this program. We also have a lot of people who are heritage speakers of these languages who come in with sort of the ability to speak and not read or write. And they have customized instruction that can meet your needs regardless of what your initial level is. Could I just ask folks who are joining right now to please mute your mics? Thanks. Or I can do it. Okay. Again, you can continue into the spring with this program if you would like. For the final program, that's called the Turkish Flagship Language Initiative. This is for the study of the Turkish language. We have a summer domestic program at the University of Wisconsin. We anticipate that our fall overseas program in 2021 will be in Azerbaijan. We have been watching the news. Hopefully things will stabilize in time for that, but we will go forward with this program in a safe location, whether or not we are able to do it in Baku. Again, it's for the intensive study of Turkish, and you don't need to have any prior study to participate. Okay, now for the rest of our programs, we're looking at self-designed or self-identified programs. So how do you find one that's eligible for Boren? Well, at the undergraduate Boren scholarships level, what we tend to recommend is that you look at study abroad programs that are offered through your university or through the wider UC system. There may be programs that meet our requirements in terms of program duration, but are not language intensive enough, so those probably would not be suitable. You may also find programs that are language intensive but aren't long enough, so you may string together multiple programs in sequence as long as you continue to study the same language in the same country. At the graduate level, we only require that you do language study. So if you want to just enroll in a language school for the duration, that is sufficient, that is equally competitive. But we also recognize that grad students often want to conduct their own research. So we want to give them flexibility to do that. As long as you continue to study the language while you are conducting your other research or internships, it is suitable. In terms of maximum award amounts, we will award you up to $25,000. For both undergraduate and graduate students, that is the preferred duration. We're looking for people to go abroad longer term and get really immersed in the study of the language. But we also give an opportunity for STEM majors at the undergraduate level to go for a summer-only program with no penalty. We recognize that it's difficult for you guys to take a spring or a fall semester off of your course progression, so we want to give you the opportunity during the summer to focus in on language study. Whatever your program is, it needs to be at least 8 weeks long, and it needs to be language intensive if you are a STEM major. Okay, now, when you apply for funding for a program you've identified yourself, you need to give us a program budget. This slide basically covers everything that will be included in that, or it can be included in that program budget. The main thing I want to say here is do not lowball your estimates when you're trying to decide how big your budget should be. The selection process will not award to somebody who comes in cheaper because they come in cheaper. We don't even look at these budgets until we are divvying up the awards, but please make sure that every cost that you have is included in your budget. We don't want you to discover 2 months into the program that you need more money that you didn't ask for. Sometimes it's available, but we can't guarantee it. Okay. In terms of designing the program, there are certain preferences that we hope you will meet. The most important of these preferences is duration. Except for those STEM majors at the undergraduate level that I mentioned, is for 25 weeks or more of time spent studying the language in country. As you can see from this table, that's what really distinguishes Boren scholars and fellows from most Americans who study abroad, is the amount of time that they devote to immersive study of the language. So unless you have a strong reason to need to go shorter term, I would encourage you to look at a 25-week or longer program. We also have preferences for certain countries. Now here they are in both blue and green. I should note that this map is sort of the map of the world without COVID in it, so we can't really anticipate where we may or may not allow people to go because of that. But our goal is to send people to as many eligible countries as possible, and we will work flexibly with people who receive the award to identify alternatives if that's not possible. But what we can anticipate is that the countries that are blue on this map are countries that we won't be able to send people to in 2021. So unless you have a very strong reason for wanting to request an award for Russia, for example, I would suggest you propose studying Russian in Kazakhstan or Latvia or Estonia, because we are likely to approve that. If you do receive the award for Russian, great. For Russia, I should say great, but we'll probably come back to you and say, congratulations, where are you going instead? We also have preferences for certain languages. Here they are grouped by region. There are a couple of things I want to note. First, in the Africa column, any language that is indigenous to a preferred African country is a preferred language. That includes North Africa. So there are far too many to list individually. So we just say all African indigenous languages are preferred. I would also note that French is only a preferred language if done in Africa through the African Flagship Languages Initiative. The other thing I want to note is that there is a bit of a discrepancy between the number of countries that we say we prefer, in Latin America and the number of languages. So there are some limited opportunities for the study of advanced Spanish or for the study of a Latin American indigenous language via Boren, but the bar is set very high. If anybody has questions about that, I'm happy to talk about that at the end of the presentation. But generally what I recommend, unless you are going to study Haitian Creole, if you have a general interest in Latin America and you already speak some Spanish, consider using that as a jumping off point to study Portuguese in Brazil and learn about the whole continent. And then finally, we have preferences for certain fields of study. Now, whether they are called STEM or non-STEM on this list, they are equally preferred. And if your exact field of study isn't listed here, just pick the thing that is closest to it. However, STEM majors are the only people who at the undergraduate level are eligible for a program of less than 11 weeks. So that 8 to 11 week program, you do need to have one of these STEM major fields. After Boren, we will provide you with significant assistance in finding a job with the federal government that suits your talents and interests. But it is ultimately going to be your responsibility to apply for and land these jobs. So it's really important in your application essay to think about the short, medium, and long-term steps that you want to take uh, to pursue a career with the federal government. So some research is in order. But once you have completed the program, the National Security Education Program team is working around the clock with the various agencies of the federal government to line up exclusive job opportunities for our alumni. There are about 100 of those per year, plus featured job opportunities with the federal government where they've essentially told us we want to hire a Boren if we can. And there are a number of reasons that the federal government wants to hire you. First, this is the program that the federal government created to develop language and area studies skills. So they know that they're going to find those advanced competencies among our alumni. But more importantly, there are sections of the law that require the federal government to consider you before they consider other applicants. So even for positions like at USAID or the DoD or the State Department, where there are thousands of applicants, you're going to be near the front of the line for these jobs. We also have a federal employment seminar annually, and people meet one-on-one or in person with various hiring officials at these agencies, and in some cases they're making job offers that week. So what I want to stress is that this puts you on an inside track for highly competitive jobs that are going to take immediate advantage of your skills after you've graduated. If anybody on this presentation is in ROTC, I just want to confirm that yes, government service does include service in the military, so please consider applying for Boren. We also have a program under the auspices of the National Security Education Program called ROTC Project Go, rotcprojectgo.org, which is a language study program specifically for ROTC. So consider applying for that as well if you are a cadet or midshipman. Post-Boren, we are looking for you to find a job with the federal government, and we have some priority agencies. What a priority agency means is that any position with these agencies or their contractors will count for federal service credit. Any position with the Department of Defense, be it military or civilian, or with a defense contractor, and I know there are lots of those in California, will fulfill your federal service requirement. Another nice thing about DoD from the perspective of somebody on the West Coast is how many military bases there are out there and various other things attached to the DoD. You might not need to move far from home if you want to continue working in international and national security policy. So that's great opportunities are often very close to home. I'll also call your attention to the Department of Homeland Security. I did speak with a graduate from one of the California state schools a couple of years ago who, right after she got back, saw a listing in her city for a position with Citizenship and Immigration Services at the Department of Homeland Security. So she was able to apply for that and to work for that agency without having to even move apartments. Positions with the State Department, USAID, or any of their contractors will count, as will any positions with the 16 agencies that comprise the intelligence community. But we also have Boren alumni working in many other federal agencies. Some people have particular policy interests like commerce or agriculture that have international dimensions to them. We have people working for the legislature, members of Congress, or the federal judiciary, so any branch of the federal government will count. And we do have people doing scientific research and administrative positions for agencies like NASA and the CDC. Also, if Peace Corps is in your future, you should know that the Peace Corps will fulfill Boren's federal service requirement. Still, like I said, we're looking for people with a longer term interest in the federal government. So it's a good idea to look at that as your short term step and to talk about medium and long term steps that you would be interested in taking to continue pursuing a career with the federal government. The application is fairly involved. There are a few months to go, so I would get started as soon as you can. It's a good idea not only to begin the application, but also to reach out to the campus representative at your particular institution, and those people can be searched on our website. We require 2 essays for undergrads and grads. We require 2 letters of recommendation for undergrads and an optional third. Those letters of recommendation can come from either professors or former supervisors. They can be people that know you in an academic or professional context, but they should be people that know you well. So please pick people that you have a lot of, you've had a lot of communication with, not necessarily someone who's got the most impressive title, because they might not be able to say as much about you. We also need transcripts for all of your collegiate level study. They may be unofficial as long as we can make sense of them. And we need you to describe the language elements of your study plan so that we understand exactly what you're proposing and can confirm that it's language intensive. The essays on the application, there are two of them. They're both 800 words for undergrads. Essay number 1 is where you make that national security argument. And again, that should be related specifically to your field of study. It should be fairly narrow, and you do need to make the explanation of how that relates to US national security or US public policy explicit in the essay. Essay number 2 is where you talk a bit about your preparation for overseas study, though you do not need to have traveled abroad before. This can be, cultural understanding that you develop moving from a rural area to an urban, or vice versa, or making friends from what you consider to. There are a lot of different ways to frame that. But 2/3 of that second essay, at least, should be taken up with a realistic career plan that you would like to pursue with the federal government. So talk to us again about short, medium, and long-term steps. Do a bit of research. We do have a lot of links on our website that you can walk through to learn more about the positions at these various federal agencies. The application deadlines are still a ways off, and I know this seems like an eternity from now for those of you who have papers to write, but I would get started soon. The sooner you start, the sooner you approach your recommenders, the better your materials are going to be. Please also, when you look up your school on our directory, look to see if the university has a on-campus deadline. That's usually a deadline that your advisors set by which you need to give them a draft so that they can give you feedback. Believe me when I say that getting feedback from not only your advisors, but your recommenders and other professors is going to be very valuable in helping to craft a more persuasive argument. And then finally, if you have any questions during this process, please contact us. I'm not exaggerating when I say that we answer every email and phone call that come in to us. Boren@iie.org is our email address. 1-800-618-NCEP-6737. That's our phone number. We are based on the East Coast, so please don't call too late or you might not reach us. That's all that I need to cover. I wanted to see LaSharon, if there are any chat questions in the chat that we want to cover first, and then I'm open to people, asking questions by raising their hand, and we can pick them after that.
Yes, there is. So I'll start reading the ones from the chat. So there is one. What are some of the job-seeking resources that Boren provides to its alumni?
Yeah, so, well, let me tell you first about the job seeking resources that you can find on our website, the research that you can do before you apply. And that is on the essays page of our website. So borenawards.org/essays. There's a subsection on federal careers. And there you can find data on where about 4,000 Boren alumni have found work in the federal government, as well as links to the careers pages of those federal agencies. So that's going to give you all of the vocabulary that you need to talk about your career plans on this essay. Post Boren, we have an exclusive jobs board that, like I said, has exclusive job opportunities that only our alumni get to see. We also have a group of people who will provide you with resume consulting and recommend new openings with the federal government that you should apply for. So there are a lot of assistance that you receive in this process, not to mention the legal requirement that the federal government consider our alumni before they consider other qualified applicants. So you will receive extensive support. You do need to seek it out from us, but it is there for you if you want it. There are plenty of people that get a job offer right out of school with the federal government and don't even talk to our counselors, but I would say they're the minority. Most people are working with us on some level to help identify an appropriate career.
The second part to that question is, if the placement for the federal job isn't the best fit, will Bourne provide resources or direct opportunities for its alumni?
So once you're into the federal government, you will begin fulfilling Boren's federal service requirement. We're not going to make you apply for any specific job. So if you see a job that comes across and it just seems like watching paint dry, it's not interesting to you, you don't have to apply for it. If you do get accepted into a position and it's not your dream job, there are a few ways to look at that. Number one, you're already fulfilling the service requirement. So if you stick around that job for 1 year, you're done with government service and you can move on with your life if you don't ever want to work for the government again. But you're also in the government system. So you've begun accruing a pension, you've begun accruing seniority. It makes, you've probably have a security clearance at that point. So it makes it that much easier for the federal government to hire you into a new position. Not to mention the fact that you're going to be inside of a federal agency. So you're going to be meeting other people and you'll hear about job openings that you'll qualify for. I can tell you my experience and the experience of many other people who've worked for the federal government is that once you got your foot in the door, getting to where you want to be is that much easier. You'll also be developing in almost any position knowledge of the government budgeting cycle, knowledge of how, to sort of make purchases and do grants and contracts and things like that. And those skills are generally applicable across the government, even if you're not in your dream job right away.
The next one is, how long do we have after the completion of our fellowship to fulfill our government service?
So with undergrads, the commitment is within 3 years of graduation from whatever your final degree is. So if you receive this as an undergrad and then go straight into a master's or straight into law school or straight into a PhD program, we will wait until you're done with those degrees because the federal government is looking to hire people with good, strong qualifications. So if you want to keep going with school, go for it. Once you're done with school, we're looking at a 3-year target. Now, you're going to need to apply for jobs, avail yourself of the resources and things like that. But we will also give credit for what we call a good faith effort. If you're just not able to get hired, eventually, we could potentially look at other avenues for fulfilling the requirement. And a lot of people, while they're waiting for federal clearances and things like that, will be working other jobs. That's just kind of the nature of federal hiring. For grad students, it's within 2 years, but again, that's 2 years from your final degree.
Could we possibly study in one country in one language and then try going to another, such as Spanish
Not
and
with the
Chile?
same, not with the same award. Boren needs to be one country, one language for the scholarship. If you receive it as an undergrad, you can apply for and receive it again as a grad student, but and that could be for a different country, but you only apply for one country, one language on your application for Boren.
So this one is a STEM student who's doing a public health program in Thailand for 7 weeks long. So 1 week short of the 8 to 11 week minimum. Is there a way to get around the minimum?
Yeah, so I think there's a fairly easy way to get around this, and it might actually help with that 7-week program as well. So you mentioned it's a public health program, was that right?
Yes.
Okay, so public health program in Thailand. Many times, STEM programs like this are not language intensive by nature. You would have to seek out additional instruction in order to do that. So you are probably either via the program provider or on your own going to have to find a language school that you can enroll in the whole time you're there in order to receive Boren funding. It can't be without language. So what I would recommend, most language schools are happy to keep you on for extra time in exchange for extra money, which you can include in your Boren budget. So talk to that language school and see if they can enroll you for an extra week or two on either side of your program so that you can get used to the language before you're dividing your time and you'll get over the minimum duration.
I think the next question is similar to this one, but it's for an art/fine arts student. Would it be a similar process if their program is a little bit short?
Well, so the concern with STEM is getting over an 8-week threshold and having it be language intensive. That's a fairly easy threshold to meet. When you're talking about a arts program, well, you have two issues here. The minimum duration is 12 weeks for non-STEM majors, but the preferred duration is 25 weeks or more. So yes, there are many creative ways that you can look at to extend your programs, such as finding a way to independently enroll in a language school for a period of a few weeks. The bigger challenge, I think, for an arts major is that you're technically not one of our preferred fields, which should not discourage you from applying, but it's more challenging to tie that to national security, to tie that to a career with the federal government. Now, the federal government does hire a lot of people with graphic design backgrounds, photography, filmmaking, etc. So if there are positions that you know of that you want to pursue, great. Work backward from there, figure out what language you want to study, and just make sure that when you're writing your application, that first essay sort of connects what you do, what you study, to a federal career.
For as an undergraduate, is there a minimum class standing that you need to meet to
No,
apply?
no, there's no minimum GPA or class standing requirement, but I will say that it's a competitive application, so people are going to have strong grades. Um, I think you do not want to leave questions about a rough patch of maybe not so good grades unanswered. If you had bad grades one semester, you should mention it somewhere in your essays why that might have happened. Maybe one of your recommenders could provide some context and talk about how you've overcome those challenges. Um, the biggest red flags, I would say, when you're looking at people's grades are, did they do well or poorly in language classes? If they didn't do well in language classes, there's going to be some doubt about your ability to continue studying the language and applying yourself to it. The other thing is if you have poor grades related to your future career plan. So if you say, I want to go work in cybersecurity, and we look at your computer science grades and they're all C's, that's not going to be very encouraging. So make sure that you contextualize rough patches if they exist.
Does working for USAID contractors count as government service?
100% yes. All USAID positions, direct hire and contractor count. Contractor. Some of you may be aware of the difference between a contract and a grant. Grantee organizations do not count unless they're also receiving contract funding, but that's a long story.
And the last one that I have in the chat is, does government service have to be fulfilled continuously for 25 straight weeks, or just a total time if you work on a project contract?
The Boren program needs to be 25 or more weeks. Work for the federal government comes later and needs to be a minimum of a year. But when you're applying, you need to talk about a longer term career plan if you want to have a shot of receiving this award.
So those were all the ones that were in the chat.
If anyone would like to, it might be easier to do the little hand raise button and then we can call on you, or unmute yourself, just take turns. Anyone feeling conversational? It's a lot of you. Okay. Olivia, please.
Just to go back to the continuous service requirement, the continuous service thing.
Study.
Sorry?
Continuous study.
Yeah, sorry. I understand that the fellowship is continuous, but when it comes to your government service, I have the possibility to work on USAID contracts in between in the summers as I do my PhD, and I was wondering
Great.
if these short stints would contribute to that service.
It will contribute to that service as long as this occurs post Boren.
Okay.
Once your Boren funding has concluded. So you're not going to get service, like if you're a veteran, for example, you're not going to get federal service for your past service. It's only what you're doing post Boren. But yeah, personal services contracts and other contracts via USAID, all of those count.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Mm-hmm.
While you're answering questions, I'm going to put up this last poll.
And let me call on Andres, who just put
Yeah.
his hand up. Yeah.
So you had mentioned a language program and possibly being related to like the school. So would a program, at least with us being the UCEAP program, would that count as a language study program?
I don't know enough about the program.
It's our study abroad program.
Andreas, do you know which UCAP program? Because there's like
It
100
depends.
plus of them.
It
Oh, okay,
depends.
it depends.
Let me just say it depends. It depends on duration and it depends on language intensiveness. Um, it's easier to work with the issue of it not being long enough than it is to compensate for it not having language focus. If it doesn't have the language focus, we're probably not going to fund it unless you can make special arrangements with the program provider to give you more of a language balance. If it's not long enough, you can participate in the UC program and then just stay on in the country in a program that you identify yourself. So that's a fairly easy workaround.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Alexandra.
Hi, I have a question. Does direct enrollment in a foreign university, like this would be through UCAP, but you go directly into a foreign university and take classes in the local language, is that considered intensive language study?
You're still going to be an enrolled student at your University of California, right?
No, you just directly enroll in the foreign university for one semester, and there's a partnership between UC and that
UC
university.
still considers you a
Yes.
matriculated degree-seeking student.
She's
Yeah.
still a matriculating
Yes.
degree-seeking student. She's just on
Got it.
exchange for that particular term.
Got it. Then yes, you will still be eligible. Just a note for, do you mind if I ask what country and like language we're talking about?
Oh, I don't have a specific one yet.
Okay, so let's just say it's in Japan. We see the type of arrangement you're describing pretty frequently in Japan or Korea, where there's like an existing partnership between a Korean university or Japanese university and an American counterpart. And so students will go and they're required, in order to be admitted to that program, they're required to already speak Japanese or Korean very well. If you go there and you're taking classes purely in that language, even if they're not like philology or linguistics courses, yes, it does count. I would still recommend that you have some language study on the side that sort of meets your needs as a second language learner. If you need additional funds from us to do that, you can put that in your program budget. But I would imagine that if that sort of program exists, that the university would also arrange for something as part of it, because again, you're still a second language learner. You still need somebody to kind of answer those questions and help you with work through issues that you have. But yes is the answer.
Okay, thank you.
There's a couple more questions coming up in the chat. If there are breaks between semesters in the study abroad program, do we need to stay in country for it to count as continuous study?
We will not count time in the country, or sorry, we will not count time not spent studying as counting toward your maximum award threshold. We do allow for short and infrequent program breaks. So let's say you have like a 2 to 3 week gap between your fall and your spring semester. If you want to stay in country or travel back to the United States or travel to a third country, we will approve that. But we don't want you to be frequently leaving the country during the period of time. That period of time that you're out doesn't count toward the 25 weeks. So make sure that you have at least 25 weeks of time in program. If you have like a really long gap, like let's say the gap between the sort of fall and spring is like 2 months, that's when you want to find an independent language school that can help you bridge at least more than half of that so that you can continuously be studying even during that gap.
Are students able to apply for multiple programs like Boren, Critical Language, and Fulbright in the same year?
Yes. When it comes to CLS and Boren, that's pretty common for people to apply for both of those programs in the same year. So for those of you who've already applied for CLS and are waiting to hear back, I would recommend starting your Boren. You're going to find out about CLS after you've submitted your Boren application. So Boren can either be something you can do instead if you're not selected, or if you are selected, something you can do as a continuation. Since CLS is only a summer program, Boren could potentially be the following fall and spring for you. But we can adjust. If you've got more questions about that, feel free to give us a call and we can explain that in more detail. But it's common for people to apply for both. Fulbright requires that you be done with your bachelor's degree. Boren requires that you be enrolled either as an undergraduate or a graduate student. So you can apply for both when you're a senior, but if you get accepted for the Fulbright, you need to graduate if you want to participate in that. If you get selected for the Boren, you need your school to extend matriculation to continue to cover you during your time abroad. So it's kind of an either or proposition with Boren and Fulbright. But we do very often see people that apply for both. We also have people that receive both. So potentially you could get a Boren scholarship as an undergrad, get a CLS as an undergrad, go on and do a Fulbright, come back to grad school and get a Boren fellowship. You can do all of those things. So don't feel like this is an either or prospect, but you're not going to be able to do a Boren and a Fulbright at the same time, or a CLS and a Boren at the same time. You can do them sequentially though.
And so another similar question is, if I was awarded the Gilman Scholarship, am I still able to apply for the Boren or CLS?
Yes, indeed. You are positively encouraged to do so. I hope you will.
Then the last one that I have in the chat is, could you talk about doing a program in one of the preferred Latin American countries that speaks Spanish?
Yeah, so thank you for asking the question. I figured there would be some interest. So Spanish is not a preferred language, nor are Latin American indigenous languages. Let me cover the Latin American indigenous language angle first. We also don't have a minimum proficiency level for those languages. So if you wanted to study something like Quechua or Quiche, you could do that via Boren. What it's up to you to do is to sort of convince the people reading your application that you understand the national security dimensions of your interest in this particular language of Latin America, and that you see that you can explain its value to your future career. I've seen a lot of people do that successfully. They do it every year. I believe this past year we selected somebody for Quiche, and we had somebody for Quechua several years before that. So all throughout Central Mexico, Central America, South America, there are indigenous language opportunities. For Spanish, we do have both a minimum proficiency level and it's not a preferred language. So here's what that means. In order to be successful with Spanish, and we have about 2 people per year out of, say, 400 that meet these standards, you need to convince us that you are already at an advanced level, and then we're going to test you in it. You have to explain how developing a further advanced command of the Spanish language is going to enhance your future career, right? So explain the national security implications, talk to us about the vocabulary you're trying to develop and why that's going to be career relevant to you later. And then you need to, I think, sorry, I bulleted that wrong, but you need to explain the career relevance and the national security relevance of you continuing to improve your Spanish. So usually there's something related to a specific career path or a specific subject matter that people hang their hat on when they're making their Spanish applications. And they tend to be picking programs that enable them to develop a professional vocabulary. So we're talking about people doing things like directly enrolling in a foreign university and taking classes that are taught in Spanish.
So they're no more in the chat, so I'm not sure if anyone else has any more questions.
Yeah, feel free to raise your hand or just unmute yourself. I think, how much time do I have? I need to get going in about 5 minutes, but I'm happy to take questions until then.
The one thing that I will say as a note, because for those who are Highlanders and you go to UCR, I am your Boren campus contact. So definitely be looking for me. You probably already have my email. Things that I will say is every campus should have some sort of writing center. So as you're preparing your application, work with that person. They're used to seeing Boren applications, and those that work with these offices, they're much cleaner when you get to your campus interviews. So it makes it a lot easier to kind of pick apart your application before you actually submit it. So that is my one tip, is to use your campus writing center to help you with your application process.
I saw someone in the chat asked if I participated. In fact, I did. 2005, I was a Boren Fellow from graduate school to Jordan, where I studied Arabic. And after that, I passed the Foreign Service exam. So I still had to take the Foreign Service exam and pass it. But I served in the Foreign Service for a little over 8 years with the State Department. And my first assignment was in Syria. I got to work in Syria for 2 years, 2006 to 2008. Happier times, I'm sorry to say. But I would not have gotten that assignment, which I really wanted, and I'm very happy I got to do, if I hadn't developed my Arabic proficiency via this extra study through Boren. I had taken 5 years of Arabic before I went overseas, but I can tell you I made more progress in the first month than I had in those 5 years, because there just isn't anything comparable to being surrounded by the language at all times.
And with that, I want to thank you, Jeff, for joining us today. I'm glad that the students were able to hear this presentation. Definitely seek out your campus Boren rep for any additional information in terms of your campus deadlines to help you start preparing to apply for this. And with that, I'm going to stop the recording.